At InDigital, we know that public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only i3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
Rapid Deploy believes that every public safety agency, regardless of size, should have access to the data they need when it matters most. That's why, since 2016, our mission has been to reduce emergency response times and improve public safety. We are the industry's only integrated emergency response platform. Our web-based cloud platform includes analytics, mapping, dispatch, and mobile apps, purpose-built for 911 in the 21st century. Visit www.rapiddeploy.com to learn how we enable effective, efficient, data-driven emergency response.
If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is going to be Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital as well as Rapid Deploy, and we are inching closer and closer to Dare to Be Great 3, the one that's going to complete the trilogy that will end it all. It has been an amazing experience to be able to offer this conference. It's March 29th right now, and in just a couple weeks, if I remember my timing correctly, it'll be the anniversary of when we started planning and pushing out that Dare to Be Great even existed, that this was something that was going to be coming out. And the first one ended up seeing, between 6,000 to 7,000 attendees from around the world. The second one is at about 2,000 or 3,000. And so we'll see what happens with this third one. With Dare to Be Great, there's been that combined 9,000+ attendees from around the world, and just hours and hours of free continuing education that is out there. So thank you all so very much, from the speakers to especially all of you who attended and who support the podcast, Dare to Be Great, the I Am 911 movement, all of it. So thank you all so very much, and look out for more information that's going to be coming out for Dare to Be Great 3. Again, that's going to be June 7th through the 10th of this year. And I'm just very, very excited for it. And I'm excited for my guest today, who's actually also a speaker for the conference. Who's also a speaker for Be the Difference conference, the one that the Denise Amber Lee Foundation ended up putting on, which was an amazing success. They are, I think, just about a couple thousand short of 4,000 total attendees from around the world. And people are registering every day still. And that was back in, it was February, I think 9th through the 11th is when it was. So many people that are still registering for it, and you still can as well. You can go to deniseamberlee.org and find all that information there. So my guest today is going to be Captain Kevin Haight, and he is with the Idaho State Police. Hello.
Good morning, Ricardo. How are you?
I am doing very well, sir. And yourself?
I am wonderful, wonderful. Excited for spring.
Yeah, we were just talking about that. We were talking about the weather, but it appears that Mother Nature said, not quite yet.
Yeah, for sure. And that's expected this time of year, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah. And a lot of people, of course, are just waiting for springtime to be able to get out there. Now, I do have to ask, and I don't mean to use the S word here, but any snow that might come back. I know for us over here, and especially when I was in dispatch, we would have some sunny days and it would be awesome. But then out of nowhere, it would start snowing again. And just in that short amount of time, it seemed like everyone almost instantly forgot how to
oh,
drive in snow.
oh, totally. I don't know what it is. It's something about the cold weather that causes the brain to freeze or something. But
Right.
yeah, it's crazy. So. But yeah, people do. They have they're stir crazy. They're ready to get out. And so I do hope people just remember winter's not quite done yet. Just take that little bit extra time and spring will be here soon enough.
Yeah, for sure. Have just a little more patience. It was the same thing with my daughters yesterday. The weather was just crazy, and they said, "You think it's going to snow again?" And I said, "Well, I remember years ago when I was younger that it snowed up until almost my birthday, and my birthday's in May." And they're both just looking at me like, "Are you for real?"
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. So my wife and I went camping in the mountains of Idaho. So
Mhm.
Idaho's in the Rocky Mountains. In fact, it's one of the most mountainous of the Rocky Mountain states. And we went camping one year in June and got snowed on. Of course, you're talking about being up in upper level elevations,
Mhm.
and so you should expect that. And that didn't completely catch us by surprise. But June, June, we got snowed on. It was crazy.
That is crazy. All the way until that time. And of course, I can only imagine that hopefully you did pack just in case something like that happened. Otherwise, I mean, it makes for an interesting time, right?
It does. It does. Fortunately, we were what we would call glamping. We had our RV, so it had a furnace in
Perfect.
it. But we had gotten enough snow that I went to open the door, and we had the awning out,
Mhm.
and there was enough snow that the awning was hanging down, and I couldn't push the door open. So I had to, just with a broom handle, poke it out through the door and pop on the awning to get the snow to slide off, so we could get the door open. So it was
Oh.
crazy.
Oh man, I can't even imagine. But yeah, I can see where it would be interesting for sure. Makes for a good
Yeah,
story now, right?
absolutely. Memories. I think we spent most of that day playing games with the kids, just sitting in the trailer, staying warm. So
Best place to be. Um, so it was awesome to hear from you during the Be the Difference conference and learn more about you and such. But I want the audience here to learn more as well, and to learn about you first, and then of course we're gonna get into talking about reclassification um, of emergency communications officers. So, but to begin with, let's go back in time and let's look at your public safety career. How did you start out to begin with? Now, do you come from a public safety background? Like, did you grow up with it, or was it just something that you kind of fell into?
great question. So public service is in my DNA.
Mhm.
My dad served in the United States Air Force. I always aspired to do that. While I was in high school, I ended up having a knee injury that involved several surgeries, and the military wasn't interested in me. Um, so I'd always had an interest in getting into public service. After my dad got out of the Air Force, he became a minister, and he is actually a minister to this day, and he has actually served as a police chaplain for a number of years while being a full-time pastor as well. So it's in my DNA to
Mhm.
serve, and so that's what drove my interest. Although it's funny how I got attracted to law enforcement specifically, because early on, when I realized the military wasn't an option, what I was most interested in is the medical field. And I started in pre-med. I was a pre-med major, and I kind of had, going on to medical school and become an emergency room doctor, something like that. That was kind of what I was wanting to do. But I was working. So my wife and I got married. We had our first child. I was working, going through school. And the job I was working at, I was responsible. So this was in South Florida. I was responsible for hiring off-duty law enforcement to patrol construction zones. And part of those duties obviously involved me interfacing with Florida Highway Patrol or the sheriff's office or the PD, depending on where the work was, road construction. And I developed relationships. Those relationships grew into an interest in what they do, which led to ride-alongs. And it was ride-alongs that I got bit by the bug. And I said, you know what, this is a cool job. I can do this. I love this. I want to do this. And so it was ride-alongs early on that shifted my focus. And yeah, as a cop, I don't make what I would have made as an emergency room doctor. But you know what? I wouldn't change anything. I have had a great career, a rewarding career. I love what I do. And so that's the early days that led me into pursuing law enforcement. Now, the interesting thing is, you picked up there, I said we lived in South Florida. I never had an interest to do it there. My wife and I wanted to raise our kids in the Pacific Northwest. I'm a hunter and a fisherman and camping and those kinds of things. And so we had decided early on, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is the trajectory I'm going to pursue. But we're going to pursue it in that particular part of the country.
It's I when you said South Florida, I thought, wait a minute. How did you end up where you're at now? But the fact that the hunting alone. So let me just target that really quick. For those who are not from Florida, the deer there, the deer probably where you're at now would eat the deer in Florida, because they're way bigger than what you see in Florida. I mean, I've been down there, and I lived there for 3.5 years. And my brother-in-law would say, we're going hunting and stuff, and my wife would say, your deer here are nothing compared to what I've seen where we're at up north. So that's one thing right away. But to kind of zero in as well on the ride-alongs, I mean, so the ride-alongs that you're talking about, those ride-alongs you had done in South Florida, right?
Yes.
So I can only imagine the types of things you saw, and especially depending on the area. So I guess when you're talking South Florida, are you talking like Miami, or where are you talking?
Yes, perfect question. So I lived just north of Jupiter, Florida, which is just north of West Palm Beach. Lived in Martin County. So I did ride-alongs with Martin County Sheriff's Office, Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, and Florida Highway Patrol. And I loved it. It was an eyes wide open experience. And I did a few of them. I tell people, even including in our organization and among our command staff, when we're talking about our ride-along policy and how open do we make it, or how restricted do we make it, I've been a strong advocate for it being pretty open, because it took more than one ride-along for me to get the passion that I have. But yeah, it was an incredible experience.
The ride-alongs, so I have to agree with you there, because when I was working, so when I first started out dispatching, I started out in Central Florida, and it was for a small police department in this tiny town called Frostproof, and that's
an interesting name.
Yeah. It's apparently the name ended up, the city used to be called Keystone. And I only know this because this was during a call that I had made to the bank, one of the local banks, early on in the morning, there was an alarm call and I had to call, and I immediately went to hold. So when you're on hold, it's telling you the story of the city. And apparently, it used to be called Keystone, but one winter in Florida, there was frost, and all of the orange groves ended up
Oh yeah.
going bad, except for in Keystone. So the mayor of the city changed the name to Frostproof.
That's an awesome story right
True
there.
story.
Wow.
But so there, I started out dispatching, and I used to ride along with one of the officers there, and we would go and sit stationary, and we would be clocking cars as they're going by, and I would try to guess what how fast they were going, and I would come within 4 or 5 miles of it, but she would get it almost every time, like right on the dot, or maybe one off. And I thought, oh, okay, so I kind of got into more of public safety that way as well, doing my ride-alongs and seeing what they do as well.
Yeah.
There's one that I remember specifically that I'll tell really quick, that we there was a dance hall there, and every Saturday it would be bumping. There was always something going on. There was always like a fight or something. And we were just kind of waiting around for something to go on, just patrolling the city. And then we get a tone out for a fight that's going on over there. So we're hauling lights and sirens, which it's a small city, so it's not that far, but it was far enough. It was still cool. And we pull in, and as soon as we pull in, everyone is outside. There's a security guard walking out with a guy who's like kind of struggling a little bit, and there's another guy behind them who is he's walking just normal. He's not doing anything. A security guard comes out of nowhere and gets right in front of him and sprays him with pepper spray in his face. And I remember him yelling, and he's yelling in Spanish, and he's yelling, "Ay Dios, ¿por qué Dios?" Which translation is, "Oh, why God? Why?" And it was, the officer that I was with, she goes, "What did he say?" And I said it to her because I'm laughing, because it's the poor guy.
He was in pain.
He was in pain. He wasn't doing anything from what I could tell. He was just walking nonchalant behind the other two, the one who was actually struggling, and the security guard comes out of nowhere and sprays him. And I told her, and she goes, "That is amazing." And I said, "Yeah, have fun." and then she goes up, and they arrest the two guys. But that's one that I won't forget. So like you, there were things with the ride-alongs, different things that really drew me into it. Now, in the beginning, was there anything that surprised you? I guess from the hiring process to even training, going to the academy and all of that, was there anything that surprised you when you were going through, is this really what it is? This is what I'm getting into?
No, not really. Our academy, the State Police Academy, and by tradition, most of the State Police Highway Patrol academies are pretty tough. In fact, they're a lot like military.
Mhm.
And so my dad had kind of prepped me from the military aspect. I remember one of the things my dad used to say that he heard when he was in boot camp. And so he would tell me this as I was prepping to go to the ISP, Advanced Training Academy, Idaho State Police Advanced Training Academy. He'd say to me, when I was in boot camp in the Air Force, they'd look at me and they'd tell us to jump, and we'd all jump. And then they'd just start screaming at us and screaming and yelling and jump. And we'd jump again. And they just start screaming at us again and say, "We told you to jump. We didn't tell you to come back down." And, and,
Oh,
and what they were doing was playing mind games.
Mhm.
But he had prepared me that it was going to be a lot of that. And it was not a picnic. But it's mostly mental. The physical part of it, I don't care if you go into the academy in the greatest physical shape possible or in horrible shape. They're going to push all of us to our limits. They want to see what you're made of.
Mhm.
Some people think of that as hazing. I don't think of it as hazing. And I'm a big advocate for our academies, policing across the country still being pretty tough, instead of being like a Snoopy Academy or a college atmosphere. And here's why. Here's why. If you can't take that kind of pressure and mind games in a controlled setting, what makes you think you're going to take it in an uncontrolled setting out in the field?
Right.
So yeah, it wasn't easy. When we moved to Idaho, like you picked up on, we literally moved from one corner of the United States almost to the other corner. And when I did that, I was all in. You don't do something like that and you're just dabbling in it. I was all in, and so quitting that academy was not an option. That I had 3 little girls by that time, and I was 29 years old, so I started a little bit later in life, and quitting wasn't an option. And honestly, I think that was one of the benefits of coming into it in that situation, where I didn't have an alternative to go to that was, like my plan B kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah. It obviously failure was not an option. And if there was any failing, it would be failing forward. You're learning while you're there and learning from it and continuing to push and push until you are in the spot where you have, graduated from there and you start. So from the time that you end up graduating the academy, how much time was there in between before you actually started with? Have you been with any other agency, or has it always been the Idaho State Police?
It's always been the Idaho State Police. So
Mhm.
I moved to Idaho in the fall of 1999. Literally got here, I think it was about September 27th or 28th, and reported to the academy on October 5th. And that's a 6-month academy process, and then of course you got field training after that. So it's a good close to a year, that you're in a training mode before you really get to start spreading your wings and flying on your own.
So what was that like for you in the beginning? And just for those who are listening, what kind of area do you cover? How many, troopers are on at a time? How big is this area that you're now, getting into patrolling and such?
I'm so glad you asked that question. One of the most interesting things about being a trooper in a state like Utah or Idaho or Wyoming or Montana, it's a big difference from being a state trooper in Michigan or Pennsylvania or even Florida. And here are the differences. In my career, it has been, and it is still, not so much for me anymore as a captain. I'm not out in the field as a matter of routine anymore. But for our troopers it is a matter of routine to be dispatched to a serious injury crash or a fatal crash or some other incident and have over 100 miles to go. And we're the closest unit. If you've ever been out in the West, Wyoming, Montana, even Nebraska, Colorado, there's a lot of open space.
Mhm.
We're few and far between. We didn't ride tandem to our cars. There were times where I was, the only trooper for 4 or 5 counties. And of course, there's police office, there's city police agencies in the towns and cities, and there's county sheriff's deputies. But even with regards to that, in some of those more rural areas, there might be one deputy on for an entire county. And so if he's got a major domestic fight, he's going to be relying on an Idaho State Police trooper as his backup. So there's some real nuances to what we do out here in what a lot of people consider flyover country versus what a state trooper job in Texas or New York might look like.
So a couple of years ago, I took a family trip to Washington State, and we went through Montana. And one of the things I remember was, or takeaways rather going through the state was when you think you need gas, make sure to get gas
Yes.
because like
Yes.
you said, there's a lot of open areas there, and there was a point where I had, I believe, 3 miles left on my tank is what my vehicle said, and I'm scrambling to find a place.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I'll bet there was some puckering on that seat you were sitting on, right?
oh yes, there was. Yeah, yeah, it was pretty scary because I didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah.
But one of the things I did like was the fact that the speed limit was about 85, so
Yeah.
that was different for sure. The way you talk, how you could be, there'd be 100 miles there, in between, or on your way to get to whatever call it is that is out there, in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, up in the UP. There are sections like that where I think there would be like 2 troopers on for that entire area, or 3,
Yeah.
something like that. Because I was up there training a bunch of dispatchers on text 911 and a few other things, and I remember asking them, and they're like, "Yeah, just be careful because help will be coming from a long way."
Yeah. Yeah.
So I definitely understand that dynamic as well. Now,
Yeah. I've had to, I've been running code 3 before to a hot call and had to shut everything down, pull into a gas station, fuel up, and then resume code 3. And that's not that abnormal. It's just crazy. You don't think about that. And
right, that would be okay. So hold on, I got to stop really quick. That would be interesting to see, only because I know myself, just in my mind, if I happen to be behind you and then I stop at the same gas station, I'm like, oh, was he just in a
it's
hurry
the
to
do-
get gas?
it's
But
the
then,
donuts. It's the donuts, man.
right, something like that, and then to see you, take off again, lights and sirens, like, oh, maybe there was what's going on. That
Yeah.
yeah, that would definitely be interesting to see, but I can't imagine that. So okay, let me ask you something on this same line. So you're headed to a call, you're going lights and sirens. Of course you have to make a stop for fuel if you need it. While you're still going, if there's other crashes that happen before you or other things that you're closer to, are you still able to, do they triage you like that, or do
Sure.
you continue, you just stay going?
No, we would triage.
Mhm.
It would obviously, it would depend on the circumstances and what now becomes a higher priority.
Gotcha. Okay.
But yeah, yeah, a few resources. I mean, there's times where, like I said, there might be 2 state troopers for 5 or 6 counties.
Mhm.
And here in Idaho, we are a state police. We're not a highway patrol, so um, w- there often can be some distinction between those two. And that is a little bit subjective, but our role in Idaho is primary on the uniform side, is primary traffic enforcement and crash investigation and those kinds of things. But because we are a state police, we are a fully sworn police agency, just like a city police department is, except we're a state police department. So we have detectives, we have troopers, and we respond to bar fights and domestics and all of that kind of stuff. Usually those are in a backup role, if you
Mhm.
will, to the local agencies. But yeah, it's too few of us often. So
See, and you were reading my mind, because I was going to ask you, what types of calls it is that you all respond to. I was speaking to a highway patrolman earlier today, and it's all accidents and such. When I was dispatching in Michigan, they were a little more heavy on some of the traffic stuff. But if we had a call that was holding, or if it was a domestic that was in progress, and you had deputies going out there, or even cities sometimes, and a trooper was close, they would go out there as well. So I was curious on, what all that you respond on. So thank you for that one.
yeah.
Along with that, though, and I don't know if you have this information or not, but about how many calls for service do you all do? Even in a year, like how bumping is the area?
Wow. So yeah, that's actually I've got some stats here. I can bring that up really quick. Um, but while I'm doing that,
Sure.
I will just tell you. So the Idaho State Police, we have two dispatch centers that cover the entire state. And our dispatching program, both of our centers are what are called secondary PSAPs.
Mhm.
Or secondary ECCs, but we have a full 911 call processing equipment system, phone system, and we're connected to all of the selective routers in the state, and we have alley drops. So any 911 call that is transferred to us, we get that Annie and alley data. Our dispatching system with those two centers is the second largest dispatching program in Idaho. The only one that's bigger than ours is in here in the county where my main office is, which is Ada County, and that's the Boise metro area. And that's a busy big center, obviously. So I'm
Mhm.
looking at numbers for calendar year 2020. Our centers received just shy of 15,000 911 transfer calls for the year. Uh, total calls. So 911 calls is one thing, but in Idaho we also have what's called Star ISP, Star Idaho State Police, and that's
Mhm.
advertised all over the state. And that is used heavily as an alternative to 911. And a lot of states have this. You know, Florida Highway Patrol, they have it. It's Star FHP. And I know a lot of states that have this. So we received over 113,000 calls from that. And those are often very akin to a 911 call. It's, road rage or someone's reporting a crash or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, so just another interesting nuance of a state police highway patrol type of dispatching center versus a traditional one. Um, Calls for service. In 2020, our centers collectively, the two centers put together, we had a total of 215,000 calls for service.
Wow.
So,
A lot of calls. A lot of calls coming in. For those who are watching and listening, who might not know whether they are in public safety or those who are in the general public, a few things here. So, what is Annie and Alley? And then you mentioned the selective routers.
ah, yeah.
What is that?
Yeah, so that's the legacy phone systems that have existed honestly for years and years and need to
Hmm.
go away. We need to be transitioning to next gen 911 technologies, and that
Right.
is happening, but slowly. But selective routers, so a telco that serves a state or a region or whatever, they have these selective routers, and it's where the calls come in, and then these routers know intuitively based on programming and data that's plugged into them, where to route the calls. And in Idaho, we have two big telcos that service the state, Frontier, which is now known as Ziply up north, and then CenturyLink in the southern part of the state. But between those two telcos, there's a total of 5 selective routers. And so we have camera trunk lines that are going into both of our centers from all 5 of those selective routers. And those camera trunk lines carry the call itself. And then we also have alley circuits, which provide the location information. Automatic location identification is what alley stands for. So,
Excellent. Thank you for giving that information, because that's information that, it's information that a lot of people don't know. I know these terms and what you're talking about because I worked in the as an industry partner with a company who does network and everything, and but there are a lot of folks that, they don't know, like, the call is going through, and that's all people need. That's all they need
yeah,
to know.
yeah,
But there are other things too that definitely help, for those to know, some of not real deep into the weed stuff, but like this little bit that you mentioned here, that's good stuff for people to know that there's more that goes on, from getting point A to B, from the caller to dispatch, and the stuff in between there. So thank you for
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on to one of the main things that we're going to talk about here, I want to go back really quick, as we're kind of wrapping up, with a look at your career and how you got started and everything. So early on, and even the early calls, middle calls, whichever, what are some of those that you remember going on? Like, was there ever a moment where you thought, and just solidified that the choice that you made going into public safety was for you, like this was meant for you?
Yeah. Boy, that's a lot. I have over 22 years of experience. And with those years, some of the experiences run together. I would just say to you, so a big part of my professional career was about 7.5 years. I was a certified, trained crash and crime scene reconstructionist. And for our agency, a crash and crime scene reconstructionist is a specialist. We get paid extra pay for those duties and responsibilities. We're subject to call out at any time of the day or night. And it's for anything from fatality crashes, serious injury crashes, police shootings, homicides, those kinds of things. And so for almost 8 years, about 7.5 years, I did that. And for about 5 of those years, I was the only one for the district office that I was assigned to at that time. So I spent a big chunk of about 5 years of my career doing a lot of intensive investigations of some of the most gory, sad things that we run into in public safety. One of the highlight cases, I guess, if you will, is a case that's been profiled on Forensic Files, Court TV. It's called the Sarah Johnson case. And you can Google it and find information about it. But it was a 16-year-old girl that was she had a boyfriend that was an illegal alien, illegally here in the United States. He was over the age of 16. In fact, he was 21, 22 years old. Dad wasn't happy that she was hanging out with him, and caught her over at his apartment one day, and took her home and said, "Tomorrow, you and I are going into the sheriff's office, and we're going to report him for statutory rape." And that night, while mom and dad are sleeping, she got her hands on a deer rifle, and she made sure that mom and dad didn't report that the next day. She killed them both. And state police got called in to provide support and investigation capabilities to the local agency, and it was a collaborative effort. And in so doing, I also was sent to that scene as the reconstructionist, and my job was to take copious measurements of that entire crime scene. And she was sentenced to 2 life sentences for killing her parents. But those kinds of calls, tragic, but yet also calls that, in one sense, I have a great deal of professional pride as well, that I played a role in something that got the kind of attention that it did, and she got the kind of sentence that she earned.
I can't even imagine going to something like that. Especially now, had you been to other reconstructions that were quite like this, or was it just completely different, where you're coming in, where in the beginning it might have been for all traffic crashes or whichever, and then because you're in this spot and you're the only one, this case happens to come up, and you're the one who's going out there now reconstructing something different than before?
So you asked me earlier about triaging calls, and do you ever get diverted? I was actually en route to a fatality, one vehicle rollover crash on the interstate when I got the call of this homicide, and I got diverted. And it was my very first homicide. I was fairly new as a certified crash and crime scene reconstructionist. And so it was my first one. And I ended up spending 3 days on the scene of that crime. But yeah, it's you learn. Part of it. I mean, you can sit down and do all the book work, but a lot of learning comes from just doing stuff too. And
Right.
Whether it's a crash or whether it's a homicide or a police shooting, whatever it is, it's like eating a pizza. You eat it one slice at a time, right? And it's the same with that. Whether no matter what the circumstance is, you just attack it piece by piece, and it comes together.
Wow. Now you have, again, as we were just saying, all these years of experience, so much stuff that you have dealt with and worked on. Have you ever had a time where you were dispatching, that you sat in dispatch and were taking calls?
No, thank God. I probably couldn't do it. I could talk on the radio, obviously, but you know this, Ricardo, but for your listeners, if you don't know me, I have a passion for what our emergency communications officers do across this country, and I've become quite an outspoken critic of apathy within my discipline, for relegating the dispatcher to a support role. I think that's shameful. It's unconscionable. I have just the utmost respect, and I say, when I say that I don't know if I could do it, I mean it. It's a tough job. My hat's off, but no, to answer your question, I've never done it.
See, it's interesting, and I love that you say that as well. Everything that you just said, because there have been times that I remember being in dispatch, and it was a bad storm that had come through, and there's trees down, wires down all over the place, and we were so slammed in there that a couple officers actually came up. A deputy and a city officer came up to see if they could help us. And the two tasks that we had given them was to, take control of like writing down some of those areas where this was going on, and then to call the road commission. And if I remember correctly, they were in there for maybe an hour or so, and they were done by by the end of that. They were like, later, we're done. I don't know how you guys do this, but that was enough.
They were begging you to send them to a barking dog complaint, I'm
right,
sure.
Yeah. Anything. Luckily I believe there were a couple trees down close to the center, and they're like, we're just gonna go sit and watch, make sure nobody nothing happens there until road commission can come and cut it up and stuff. Or I believe there was one deputy who actually he had a chainsaw, like a little mini chainsaw in his trunk, and because he lived close, that's why, and he got it, and he was out there taking out trees too. So, but in that time, just that little bit, they're like, yeah, nah, I can't do this. So in your experience in, with everything that you do, how did you get involved in, the reclassification of emergency dispatchers to begin with?
Boy, so in May of 2015, Pocatello, Idaho Police Department hosted training called A Victim's Plea. And Nathan Lee provided that class. It was an 8-hour class. And someone, and I don't even remember who, but someone encouraged me, now as the captain over our emergency dispatching program. And I should say, in this current role that I'm in, I sit on the state 911 board, and I'm also the chairman of a statewide committee called the PSAP Standards and Training Committee. So I'm pretty immersed in emergency dispatching in Idaho, and have been now for to date, now about 7 years. I was about 2 years into that when this training happened in Pocatello, and I was encouraged to go. I'd never heard of Nathan Lee. I'd never heard of Denise Lee, but I sat in that class and heard his presentation, and it's emotional. If anybody has never heard that entire presentation, boy, I would urge you to take the time to attend one of his classes virtually or in person. For me, I bonded with Nathan in terms of empathy for what he went through as a widower, and felt that connection. But where I really bonded or felt a connection was for Rick Goff. That's Denise's dad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, why Rick Goff? Because I have 3 girls. They're beautiful girls. And yes, I'm biased, but if I showed a picture right now, I've got girls that are drop dead gorgeous. Denise was a beautiful girl, and I'd look at pictures of her and I would think about Rick, because Rick was a sheriff's department sergeant.
Mm-hmm. So
he was a cop. This was a cop's daughter. And not only was he a cop, and this was a cop's daughter, but the very dispatching agency that completely botched the thing was the agency he worked for. It was his peers that contributed to the untimely death of his daughter. That they didn't kill her. The bad guy killed her. But some abysmal work at that center resulted in him being able to carry out his dastardly deeds. And I just sit there as a father of 3 girls, as a police officer, and now with the weight of 911 and emergency dispatching on my responsibility plate. And I sat there and said, you know what? This is unconscionable. This cannot happen. I'm in a position to do whatever I can do to make sure it doesn't happen in Idaho. And that's what gave me the passion that I have. And that passion, if anything, it grows more and more day by day and week by week. There is so much apathy, Ricardo, in public safety towards the emergency dispatching profession. And I get a little nauseated, to be honest, because there's so many initiatives to improve technology in our centers, improve those capabilities, and we should. I'm not saying we shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
But with all of that stuff, we're leaving our profession behind. They're not paid commensurate for the work they do. They're not trained commensurate for the work they do. They don't get the same kind of benefits that we get as field responders. And there needs to be an intervention of the status quo. And the buck stops with my discipline. Some of the excuses, the lame arguments that we've made as a profession for years and years and years are just pathetic.
I want to give you a standing ovation because this all rings true. I mean, I remember when I was in dispatch, and so the last agency that I worked for, they used to be under the sheriff's department, but then they split off to be their own entity, central dispatch. Once that got split off, all of, or not, maybe not all, but most of the benefits that came with being with the sheriff's department were gone. So even, and we were a union shop. So even with that, when it came up to time to get, raises and everything, we really didn't have any legs to stand on. I mean, everything had pretty much gone, and there was fact finding and all this other stuff that they were going to do, but the county they didn't want to budge. They're like, you're not the sheriff's department. Like, well, everything starts with us, and so it was a big battle. We finally ended up getting a raise. It was a 3% raise, but it was over 3 years. So so it was stuff like that. But to hear you say all of this and to push it, because you're right, hopefully will not be another situation that comes up like this. There will not be another Denise. And with your help, with the foundation, like with this push to get 911 dispatchers and call takers, their training, all of this, but also this reclassification to be put up where everyone else is, it's going to help, and help so much. Now, you had in your graduate degree program, you had a thesis that you had put together. Now, can you give kind of a brief introduction of that?
Sure. Brief. It took me 18 months to write it, and you want me to talk about it in 2 minutes. Yeah, so you can Google it. The title, if you Google this title, you can find it because it is published by Naval Postgraduate School.
Mhm.
But it's titled 911 colon, what's our emergency, with a question mark. And then a subtitle is diagnosing a struggling occupation serving a neglected system. And it really, I try to take a hard look at the profession and some of the things that are going on in terms of the discipline, the profession. And I did it from a holistic standpoint. I did not do it from a state of Idaho standpoint,
Mhm.
or from even my agency standpoint. I looked at it collectively as a nation, including U.S. territories, and just tried to identify some things that needs to change. An intervention of the status quo, like I said earlier, to include reclassification, to include the fact that nearly half of our states don't have any kind of a training standard or a continuing education standard. Nearly 3/4 of our states don't have a character standard for these folks. And that isn't to say that many, many agencies across the country don't have their own internal robust standards.
Mhm.
Of course they do. I'm not at all saying that we don't have some outstanding work being done out there by agencies and by emergency dispatchers. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about the system. The system is flawed. We shouldn't have half of our states or 3/4 of our states that don't hold a professionalization and standardization policy as a matter of law for the people that are at the very tip of the spear in public safety, the 911 dispatcher. Why? They're the air traffic controllers of public safety. How many of you would get in an airplane and go to Hawaii if your air traffic controllers didn't have to meet a standard? You know? But we got 911 centers and folks that are doing their best working in those centers all across this country that are not trained well. They are not equipped well. They are not paid well. It's the reality, and it shouldn't be.
What are some of the benefits? Because I know I've heard a lot of different things, whether it be the state level or the federal level. But from your understanding, especially with all the research that you've done and everything that you've put out there, your knowledge and all, what are the benefits of reclassification for emergency communications officers?
Well, first and foremost, it's a public policy acknowledgement that these people are vital to
Mhm.
public safety and frankly, Homeland Security. Think about it even beyond just public safety, Homeland Security for a second. Think of any massive Homeland Security event that's happened in this country over the last 20 years. 9/11. I would submit to you that 9/11, when that first plane hit that tower, probably one of the very first phone calls made was to where? 911.
Mhm.
The shooting in Las Vegas, 911 was overrun. So even a Homeland Security event, not just a public safety event, but something bigger than that, like a national Homeland Security event, like 911 or emergency dispatching sits at the very tip of the spear in that stuff. And yet we as a nation consider the folks that sit in those centers as secretarial, clerical. So first and foremost, we just need to publicly, policy-wise, acknowledge these people aren't clerical, and that isn't a diss on clerical folks. My administrative assistant is fantastic. I love her. But she would be the first to argue that her job has very little to do with what my dispatchers are doing out in the ECC. It's not even a comparison. So we've classified them in the wrong position, and we as a nation, just from a policy standpoint, are okay with that, and that needs to change. I know there's been legislative intent to do that, but that's stalled. Hopefully that changes. But that's the first thing that needs to change, because that's the first acknowledgement that these people are more important than clerical. And then I feel like doing that, some dominoes would fall over time in some of these other areas where agencies and policymakers and even leaders of organizations such as my own would be forced to reconcile with the fact that we can no longer pay these people wages that are just inexcusable. You want to wonder why we have attrition problems in 911? Maybe wages is some of it. And I'm not saying wages is going to fix all of that, but so it's a lot of things. But I think it starts with a reclassification. I mean, they're in the wrong field, and that's, that needs to change. We in the public safety classification, we've got crossing guards in there with police officers and firefighters. Security guards are in there. School bus monitors are in there. But yet the Office of Management and Budget doesn't want to put the emergency dispatcher in there.
Yeah,
really?
It's amazing when all of this when I first started getting into a lot of this as well, right around the time that I launched the I Am 911 movement to really use a dispatching a way of doing things, of kind of being in your face, and raw of what, to show the difference, to bring awareness to this issue and to show the difference between emergency dispatchers versus, taxi or, semi, all of that. A lot of those that fit into the protective class, or that are in there rather, I didn't know were also like lifeguards, are in there as well. This was not something that I was aware of until all of that. This is back 2016 now, when that was going on. So the first thing, that reclassification, is basically the recognition that emergency officers are in there. Media communication officers are in that spot. And like you said, the rest, the dominoes will fall. The rest will come with it, whether it be, a retirement change, or, benefits, or even training, how training funds are now shifted over because of the reclassification. There are so many things that can happen, but it's that first big step for it to happen, whether it be statewide or federally or both. With the name 911 dispatcher, telecommunicator, as you said, in Idaho, it's emergency communications officer. Now, in your opinion, do you think that, because we've always used dispatcher, right? It's always been out there as the generalized dispatcher or call taker, mostly 911 dispatcher, right? But do you think that name needs to change now? Does that need to change in order for even the OMB, I guess, to recognize it as well, or be one more step into reclassification?
So I'm going to give you an opinion here, obviously. And my opinion is it would help. It would contribute to it. I am fond of what we've done here in Idaho, emergency communications officer, or ECO. And, as a side note, the industry is moving away from the term PSAP and wanting to move to emergency communications centers, or ECCs. And I like that. What a great marriage of ECCs and ECOs, emergency communications officers, right? And I've heard some say, well, the word officer, they're not really sworn personnel. Okay, get over yourself, people. We use CTO, communications training officer, and we've used that in the industry for how long, Ricardo? Years.
A long
right?
time.
Right. So yes, to answer your question, I do. I think, and I don't think, so I'll say the word dispatcher sometimes, and I have tremendous admiration and respect for the profession. And so for me, when I say that, I don't mean that derogatory. Some, I think, they bristle a little bit at that because of some of this confusion with, the tow truck company dispatcher and the power utility dispatcher and the train dispatcher and all that. And I'm not one of those. And I get it. I understand. So yeah, I here in Idaho, we use ECO, or emergency communications officer. And I really like that. Our agency, actually, our agency, it's regional communications officers. And that's been my entire career. We were calling them RCOs before I got hired. And it just elevates the job. It elevates the fact that these folks are they're part of the team.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons I hate the word telecommunicator. Telecommunicator isn't a word. First of all, you type it in Word document, and then the document tells you it's not a word.
Right.
So whoever thought that was a great idea, I don't know. But it's not even a word. Now, I understand we put public safety in front of it, so it gives it a little bit of clarity. But I would submit to you, if you grab some John Doe out on the street and ask him, hey, do you know what a public safety telecommunicator is? Or just telecommunicator, do you know what a telecommunicator is? You're going to get all kinds of answers because it is so ambiguous. And even if they do tell you, oh, I bet you that's a 911 dispatcher. Even if they do tell you that, that term doesn't really capture everything the profession does. Telecommunicator, my dispatchers, my regional communications officers do way more than telecommunicate.
Right.
They're talking on the radio, they're entering data, they're data mining for stuff, for troops that need information, intel. They do so much, following protocols. They do so much more than telecommunicate. So yeah, not a fan. You know that.
So along with that, as we're kind of getting into, the wrap up of this, what are two other things that you think in the dispatch profession that need to be addressed to really move this forward? As we were saying, there have been legislation that's gone out there. I believe it's actually going to be reintroduced. I'm not sure how soon, but it's going to be reintroduced again. And there's so much more that is going into it. I mean, you even got this, N911 bill that's out there right now as well. So there's so much more. But specifically for this, what are a couple other things do you think that that needs to be addressed, or that needs to happen really for the reclassification to actually go through?
Well, I think, unfortunately, because of the way OMB postured on this thing back in 2017, 2016, I think, unfortunately, the 911 Saves Act is probably the only thing that's going to force their hand. So I think that is the first thing. If that's successful, and hopefully it is, if that's successful, I think that really starts the cascading effect. There are a few states, as you know, that have actually done this. They've kind of gotten out in front of this and done this at the state level. I was telling you offline at the beginning, Idaho is not one of those states, but we don't have any statute that addresses the classification specifically, even of my discipline in Idaho. So I'm not so concerned about that reclassification at the state level here in Idaho, because with the way we're structured, it's not really an issue, but in some states it is. I think I think the next thing that needs to happen is, unfortunately, the three-quarters of the states that don't have any kind of a state mandated standard, a hiring standard, a certification standard, a continuing education standard, that also needs to change. I think that also makes the argument more compelling that these folks are first responders. Their pay, their benefits, their retirement, all of that should be in parity with their other field responder peers. But until there's standards and everybody is playing by the same sheet of music, that's another gap. Did that answer your question?
Yes. Yeah. No, yeah, you definitely got it there. Because there's just so much that goes into it that, it's also kind of hard to pinpoint, just one or two things there, but those are main ones for sure. As we go into the wrap up of this episode, which has been awesome to have you on and to learn more about this information, and of course where people can find your thesis as well. When it's all said and done, like, how about this? Where do you see the dispatching in just the next few years? Because there's so much that's going on, right? Let's say not only this reclassification happens, but also, the technology that's coming in as well. Because I think that when the reclassification happens, in my mind, I have an idea that, a lot of the funds will also be able to be, whether it be, the NG 901 bill, and if that were to go to training or anything like that, by having this reclassification, some of the funds that end up going to different centers will be able to be used more for training and such, which will be good, because with the new technology that's coming in, you've got video and such, that now those who are answering the call will not only be answering the radio, answering the call, they'll also be seeing a lot of this. And a lot of that training is going to go towards that mental health and wellness of those who are doing this. How do you see all of that working out?
Yeah, so I touch on that in my thesis as well, and I think agencies, well, frankly, let's back up. States need to mandate hiring character standards, training standards, and part of that is going to include, there needs to be a pivot in even what kind of training requirements we have, because of exactly what you touched on. Incident-related imaging that's going to be live streaming into some of our centers, and in fact, in some centers, it is already. It will no longer be you pick up the call and it's a suicidal caller and it's a voice, and there's a bond over the phone line with the voice on the other end, and trying to get rescuers there and trying to talk the person out of it. The reality is you're going to see them. They're going to be on your screen. And the unfortunate reality is some of them are going to do what they're going to do. And they're going to do it live on the screen. Our people have to be prepared for that. The argument that these people aren't first responders, they aren't out in the field, they don't experience the same things I as a police officer experience. That was a lame argument before Next Gen 911, frankly. But it isn't an argument with Next Gen 911. They are going to see it. They're going to witness stuff. And some of it's going to be horrific.
Yeah. And when that all happens, it's going to be definitely up to all of those centers, the agencies, to really hone in on that mental health and wellness.
Absolutely.
Because it's one thing now to be able to hear it, and sometimes it's worse in your head piecing together this puzzle, but seeing it there, it's a whole other one.
It totally is. And there's some research out there. Dr. Michelle Lilly, I don't know if you're familiar with her or not, but I cite her in my thesis, and I've talked to her several times. But she's done research on how mental health and how calls affect the 911 discipline. And that's under the current situation where we don't have the live streaming of video feed and stuff in most of our centers. And yet her research showed that our emergency communications officers are at a very high risk of peritraumatic stress, mental stress. Some folks that can lead to PTSD, some others maybe not necessarily a PTSD diagnosis, but nonetheless, mental illness or emotional illness as a result of the stuff that they've experienced. And yet, we're not really, as an industry, a public safety industry, we're not really positioned to deal with that and to help our people through those kinds of challenges. There needs to be a pivot for sure.
Well, thank you so very much for coming on and sharing your story. The call that you mentioned and everything early on, being a crime scene investigator and such, and then all of this wealth of knowledge as well. One more time for those who are listening as well as watching, how can people get a hold of your thesis to learn more on it?
Yeah, so it's published by the Center for Homeland Defense and Security, which is a program under Naval Postgraduate School. And if you Google the title, 911, What's Our Emergency? Diagnosing a Struggling Occupation Serving a Neglected System, you should be able to find it.
Perfect. Thank you again, sir, for being on. I appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you for what you're doing. It's an amazing movement that you've been able to be a part of, a catalyst for. And man, I just admire you. My hat's off to you and what you've accomplished. And thank you for this opportunity.
I thank you for that. I appreciate the kudos. I'll be right back here with you. For those who are watching, if you have any comments, questions, or you want to be a guest on the show, you can email us, and that's going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter. That is @911podcast. You can like us on Facebook. That is facebook.com/Within the Trenches podcast. This episode has been sponsored by InDigital as well as Rapid Deploy. And if you're looking for any bonus content, you can check us out and support us on patreon.com/WTT podcast. I wouldn't be able to do everything that I do if it wasn't for the sponsors as well as patrons. And of course, all of you who watch, listen, share, and support. So thank you so very much. I appreciate it more than you know. This episode can be seen on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, as well as LinkedIn. And you can listen 24/7 on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone.